Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Battle Gamer, and I'm gonna be getting back into making videos. I know it's been very inconsistent for the last couple months. January was a really just messed up month, and something that I've realized and a change I've made recently on the channel is live play content. While it's good, as with tabletop in general, it's really hard to make people consistently be there every week. Can't account for everything, can't account for life events. Other people have lives going on, and so it just left me with a lot of days that I wasn't doing anything, and I didn't want to commit any, scheduling to those days because I had a prior engagement. So I am reducing the number of live play content on my channel to about one game a week, maybe two if there's a special event, and the rest of the time I'm going to be trying to pump out about 2 to 3 videos a week. We will be finishing up the why this class is awesome, but I figured we're also going to move to do some more like general tabletop stuff. Speaking of, you probably guessed by the name of this title, we're going to be talking about my own, subjective tier list for Pathfinder 2e classes. Now, this comes with a few stipulations. First of all, this is a very generic based weight on the 3 pillars of gameplay, which is exploration, combat, and roleplay. And the roleplay category is very hard. It's a very subjective thing because it's based on the player. So I'm just trying to base it as objectively as I can on what the class produces for, any prospective player. Now, if you are a more experienced player, obviously the roleplay category could be S tier across the board. So I'm going to be marking each of these through an S through F. F being the class is completely incapable of doing it, which I'll let you know right now there are no F tiers. And S being the class hands you, exactly what you're looking for in that category. And then I'm going to place them on the tier list based on the average. So if, the weights pretty much go: an S tier is worth 5 points, A is worth 4, B is worth 3, C is worth 2, D is worth 1, and F is 0. So if a class nets between 0 and 2 points, it's an F tier. If it nets between 3 and 5, it's D. 6 and 8 is C. 9 through 11 is B. 12 through 14 is A, and a 15 perfect score is an S. That being said, as I said before, this is a very subjective based tier list because you and what you prefer in your tabletop or your group's tabletop are probably going to be weighted differently than what I'm doing here. For instance, for my own games, I rate roleplay way higher as far as what makes the game actually enjoyable. Exploration is great, combat is great, but if the roleplay isn't good, I struggle to really get invested in a game. You might have a game that's more based on, the combats or the out of combat based activities, in which case, exploration or combat might be weighted a bit higher. So this is very baseline. Anyone can take a look at this list and generally guess what the class has available to them. So we're going to go ahead and get right into it. So we're going to go ahead and pop over here. All right. So fortunately for me, they already had a tier list set up on the tier list or tier maker site. So I didn't really have to do all too much. That's great. We're going to start with alphabetical order, which means that we're going to be starting with Alchemists. Let's go ahead and we'll start with combat, exploration, then roleplay. We'll do that in that order. Combat. Alchemists struggles. They have a lot abilities, and they have a wide range of versatility. Alchemist can go anywhere from a bomb expert who's dropping a lot of persistent damage effects on enemies, even enemies that are incredibly hard to hit, meaning that alchemists are always adding at least some damage even if their attack scores are low, which is good for them in a sense, because it means that their actual attack scores don't need to be that high, because at least they're always doing a few points of splash damage. But because one of their main focuses of damage is bombs, the item bonuses and getting them prepared and everything like that makes it hard to very consistently do the same kind of attack bonuses, have the same kind of accuracy. Again, that's made up for the fact that most bombs have a splash effect, and an enemy has a weakness to a bomb you have, then you're always proccing it 100% of the time. So I say that the Alchemist's combat abilities and support abilities are at a B tier. They're pretty solid, they're not overly consistent, and I feel like there's a lot of situations that are not necessarily good for it. Their mutagens, again, a lot of it is just very okay. And the reason why I'm not marking that as a C tier specifically is because all the classes in the game really generally do well in combat, because that's a large part of where your feats come from and everything like that. And it can be kind of mixed around to do some benefits as well. And because the Alchemist can just pull out health potions easily and even throw health potions at people, they're a pretty solid combat class. We're gonna mark that as a B. Exploration. Alchemists kind of struggle with this one as well. They have a lot of good abilities. A lot of the mutagens can be used to help in negotiations, in puzzle solving, and all that kind of stuff. They don't get a lot of extra mobility type of things per se, nor do they have a lot of abilities like a wizard would for overcoming certain obstacles. I will say that overall the Alchemist has a pretty C tier. No, you know what? Alchemist has a really B tier, and the reason why I'm saying that is crafting. Alchemists are very motivated to have a high crafting score, making them a really good, default for the party for upgrading gear, getting runes, and of course, gearing the party out with a lot of potions and such. So they're really, really solid. They just don't have necessarily all of exploration kind of encapsulated. So we're gonna mark that as a B tier as well. Roleplay. Alchemist roleplay is, I think, pretty good. The Alchemist kind of gets shoehorned into like either the mad scientist kind of build, or maybe they can go with more like a medicant kind of thing. I think the class really lends itself to some kind of sciencey based aesthetic. It's really good. It's not the most diverse, but I do believe that the Alchemist kind of really hits a good mid-range tier overall as far as its roleplay is concerned. It's not hard stuck in its roleplay aspects like some of the other classes. And again, this is very subjective, and you could make a really, really interesting Alchemist. I think the class just inherently doesn't offer the most as far as roleplay elements are concerned. So I'm gonna mark that as as kind of a C tier overall. So that means that overall weighted, that is going to be 8 points, which puts Alchemist right at the end of C tier. Now, this does not say that Alchemist is not a great class. I think Alchemist is really good, and kind of a more meta thing. Alchemist is just a very hard class to keep organized. So I think C tier is really good for a general public. Now, if you love Alchemist and you do like a lot of stuff with it, I think it's an incredibly fun class, and don't let a C tier dissuade you from playing the class at all. But for newcomers, I think it is a slightly more rough class than average. Barbarian. The Barbarian, combat-wise, is very satisfying. The Barbarians do a lot of damage. Their rage damage gets higher and higher. Some of the different instincts get even higher, like up to plus 18 additional damage at like high level. They're really fun. They're really stalwart. I feel like the Barbarian does not have as many good like attacking based feats as they should. They do have a lot of feats that really keep them on their feet in combat though. They can regenerate temporary hit points, for instance. And they're overall just really hard to deal with, and especially when their instincts give them resistances, it can make for a very rough battle. I wish Barbarian just had a bit more on the combat side for like feats that really work, but they do have a lot of aesthetically pleasing feats. We're gonna mark Barbarian as an A in combat. The exploration. Barbarian really doesn't got anything. I mean, they have some abilities that allow them to move really, really fast. They do have some decent athletics boosting abilities. Giant Instinct Barbarian, for instance, it can become big and thus can, you know, reach those high shelves. It's not a very strong class when it comes to out of combat exploration based stuff, and also you're not very motivated to have a high intelligence, so you're not likely to have a lot of skills either. So I'm gonna weight that as around a C tier. Barbarians have some things, but they just don't offer a whole bunch as far as exploration activities is concerned. Roleplay. I think with the instincts in the game, Barbarians have a really solid roleplay aspect. They have all kinds of tribal-based stuff. They have different kind of codes and ethics based on instincts. And then they even have the frenzy instinct, which just makes it, you just have a rage, and it doesn't necessarily come from anywhere particular. I think it has a high versatility. It has a very strong ability to be geared in a lot of ways. I think its only limiting factor is the characters are based on rage. They have a rage ability, and so all the characters have to have some kind of rage, either an issue, or it can kind of lean even into the edginess where they have the dark mode or something like that. Some people like that, and I think it's a very solid tier type. I'll weight it at a B. So A being 4, C for exploration being 2, and roleplay being a B, which is 3. That overall is going to be 6, 9, which is going to put Barbarian just above Alchemist as far as ease of play. And I think Barbarians are a really solid class. They got lots of high hit points. They have really good abilities. They do satisfying damage, even if they only hit you once in a round. Like, a Barbarian just feels very satisfying to play. And I think that a Barbarian's a very good starter class overall. Bard. Combat. Bards are a really solid combat class. They might not be the most fun because they have a high focus on their, their songs, their inspiration, courage. Even when it comes to like Dirge of Doom or anything, they have a constant buff, debuff. The biggest thing about the Bard is that they give status bonuses to allies or status penalties to enemies. And every point that they add or subtract from an individual makes them easier to hit, easier to resist, or makes your allies do just that much more extra damage. And it can really make a huge difference. Not only that, but the ability to use a lot of the occult spells, whether it's summoning, whether it's all kinds of things, whether you're going a battle muse bard, there's a lot of ways that you can add to combat, but your songs especially really make the bard just really good to have. So I'm going to weight the bard at an A in combat because those buffs make them great. Their offensive capabilities are kind of on the subpar level though, but they do get some good abilities as long as the enemies are not... Oh, you know what? Mental immune enemies, or enemies that are like can't hear, can make the bards a little rough. So I'm actually going to drop that down to a B. Not for anything in particular. Most combats, I think bards really do succeed in a lot of ways. But I think because their spell list is more based on mental stuff, if you're going up against undead or enemies that are considered mindless, bards kind of struggle bus a bit, and it doesn't make them as viable in most combat situations. So I'm going to actually make that a B. Exploration. Bards have a lot of ability to use performance in place of a lot of other skill checks, especially the more social ones. Bards are also, have the occult spell list, which is actually really good out of combat. You got the ability to put people to sleep and all kinds of stuff. Overall, and being a magic caster as well, bards have a lot of options for a lot of situations. And because they might not be more physically based, they can invest more in things like intelligence, charisma. They can be really, really handy in a lot of situations. And they have a lot of spells to kind of get them there. Not only that, but if you go with like some of the feats like Bardic Lore and all that other kind of stuff, they can just know a lot. They can reveal a lot of information about enemies and such. I think that makes the Bard an A-tier exploration character. They're very, very solid in a lot of places. And while they might not be as versatile as some of the other classes in doing so, the fact that they fill the group face very easily and they can do it all with like one skill makes them a really solid choice in exploration activities. Roleplay. I think Bard has some stigmas. The horny Bard one is a really rough one. Bards are also good talkers. I do like the fact that their performance can be a lot of things, whether it's storytelling, whether it's music, whether it's interpretive dance, whatever. I think the Bard has a lot of things. The muses, I think, are also really interesting, and I think they're kind of underplayed in Pathfinder 2e a little bit, because not much more goes beyond it, but you typically have a muse that is a particular thing that your character focuses on. I think it's overall really solid. I don't think it necessarily jumps out at people as much, so I'm going to mark that as a B as well. Meaning that the Bard has, 2 Bs, which is 6 points together, and an A, which is 4 points, making that a 10, putting it in just the same category as Barbarian. Easy peasy. Bard did pretty well, honestly, and I think Bard is a really solid class. If you like playing the group face, if you're not necessarily as into combat, but you want to give a very helpful buff, everyone likes having a Bard in their party because the Bard just makes everyone else better. Not only that, but you have a lot of good options outside of combat to do some fun trickery. Trickster Bard, Charismatic Leader Bard, there's so many ways to play Bard. I think a Bard is a very solid class. Champion. Champion's really fun. Now, this is class I think is going to be a very big divergence from what you might expect, especially because D&D 5e's Paladin is a very strong and very tanky kind of class. The Champion is a lot more focused on tank. They're not smite machines, but they do have a lot of capabilities. Combat-wise, I think the Champion is a very stalwart frontline fighter. They have lots of good abilities against dealing against particular types of enemies. And not only that, but they have the ability to support their group with things like Lay on Hands, giving them a very strong healing capability. And overall, you can build your champion in a multitude of ways. Even taking the Divine Ally mount gives you an animal companion, which is really good and gives them a lot of extra abilities in combat. Not only that, but if you start going to the anti-paladin routes, you actually have a lot more offensive capabilities as well. Granted, the class is still mostly a defensively weighted class. Overall, I think the champion, is on the end of A, just because they can do a lot of things in combat. They're very reliable, and they're very handy to have around, especially with things like Lay on Hand. They're very particular types of damage, I think, stop them from being on the S tier as far as capabilities. They also don't get as many actual martial-based feats to make them contend with a warrior, for instance, or a warrior. Oh my god, I've been playing too many different games. A fighter in this game. Oh my goodness. Anyway, A for champion for combat. The exploration, it can range, but I think the champion suffers from what a lot of martial classes do. They just don't have a lot of options outside of combat. I think that they might have some capabilities. Again, they can get like a mount that can be very handy in a lot of situations, but I think they struggle in a lot of other situations. I think they're motivated also to have a good charisma score, which is good. I think I'm gonna rate them more in the C tier, unless I'm missing anything particular. They just don't have a lot of things outside of combat that make them overly useful, beyond the fact that they can, heal people. That's a good story element, but I don't think it's a very strong aspect. So I'll weight that as a C. Roleplay. The champion offers a lot of different roleplay, especially because they have a lot of alignment-based roleplay, so there's that to take into consideration. They're dedicated to certain gods, and my god, there's so many different gods in Pathfinder 2e. There's even a lot of variety of like sub-gods or like demigod individuals that you could be a champion under. I think the champion's very strong. It's a little rough that they're weighted on the alignment scale, probably more than some other classes. But I think they just have a lot of versatility, a lot of viability, and because they can be lawful good, neutral good, or chaotic good, and the same on the evil spectrum as well, it just gives them a lot of opportunities to do a lot of different kinds of roleplay. So I'm thinking I'm going to rate the champion as an A in its roleplay aspects as well. So 2 A's make an 8, and a C is 10. Putting champion right along with the B tier here. And I think that the B tier is going to be where most classes are. Paizo did a really good job of balancing the classes. Champion, again, is another really good class, I think, for a lot of players to really dip their toe in, especially because the roleplay aspects are kind of hand-fed to you. They have a lot of good ways that they can just benefit. And new players especially, I think, will really like the champion in a lot of ways. So if you're new to the game, try looking at champion. It's not the same smite machine. You're not a high DPS like you are in D&D 5e, but that's exchanged for being just very solid on the battlefield and a very welcome frontliner for most groups. All right, Cleric. Cleric's really good. It's a spellcaster. The divine spell list can be a little tricky at times, but Cleric is by far an S tier combat character because they get extra heals at their highest spell level based on charisma modifier to, heal allies. And the healing spell in this game is massive. Not only that, but because you can variable cast it, making it touched, ranged, area burst. A lot of combat situations can be saved by having a really solid cleric in your party. And whether they're a war priest or cleric or whatever they got, those heals are still just as beneficial. So the cleric is definitely an S tier. And Divine Spell has got a lot of my favorite spells in it. The Divine Spiritual Weapon is a really, really good spell for combat overall. And because you can just use an action to sustain it every round, it allows you to do like the ranged heal if you need to, move, do whatever. And the cleric only gets better when you start adding more things on, especially with like free archetype or a lot of the feats and abilities. And because they're more motivated to have a higher charisma score, they can do a good facing job as well. Speaking on facing, exploration, they're a spellcaster like any other, so they do get a lot of abilities to handle some situations. I feel like the divine list is less versatile than some of the other ones in some ways, but they can give some good resistances, which can help get through some pretty bad kind of different terrain effects. The heals, again, can help negate some of the damage traps and such might have. I think that they overall have a very solid exploration, and again, they have a little bit more on the facing side of things potentially. So I'm gonna say that they're more B tier, and that's only because the cleric itself has to put they have to put so many in so many boxes, so many stats in so many boxes, because they want a high wisdom if they want to use their spells more. They have to have a high charisma if they want more castings of their heal spell. And if you're a frontline war priest, then you got constitution and strength to worry about. I think that they just have a very high stat demand, which makes them not necessarily the best in a lot of situations. So I think a B for their exploration is definitely necessary. And roleplay, same thing as champion. Clerics can do a lot of different things based on the gods they're under, but unlike champion, that's all they got going for them. Champion has the alignment driven things that really gets handed to them. Clerics kind of really have to base themselves around their god, and I feel that can be really limiting. It has made some very interesting clerics, but I think that the gods pretty much weigh like almost everything that the cleric has to offer roleplay wise. So I'm gonna rate that as a B tier as well, mostly just because the gods are interesting and you have a lot of options, which means there's a lot of different choices you can do for clerics in general. But because you're stuck on that whole god trend kind of thing, you're either with your god or you're just like not a good cleric, which is another archetype that you can take. It's like, they just don't have the most options. So that's going to be another B tier. So 2 B's is 6 points and an S is 5, making that 11, which puts them just at the high end of B. So we don't have any A's yet. I'm actually very surprised the cleric didn't quite make the cut, but it does make a lot of sense. Cleric's a really fun class, and if you're new to the game, I really recommend that you take a look into it. But one of the things that I will also say is it's really easy to get shoehorned into that whole be the healer for the group kind of thing, and that's not really that fun. So, you know, like, clerics are great, and because that they have those extra heal spells, it makes them really fun in a lot of situations because they can do more things than just heal, because they get free heal spells handed to them anyway, and they're all at their highest levels. So they're really good. So clerics are really solid class overall. I think a B is really good. I think even an A potentially. I mean, they're at the top of B. They're a B plus. So clerics are really solid pick. Druid. Combat-wise, the primal spell list is really good, very versatile, has a good amount of offensive abilities, defensive abilities, good exploration kind of activities as well. Certain druids can also transform, giving them a wide ability. Druids, I think, are really fun in combat situations, and they can just be a really, really strong primal spellcaster or, you know, shapeshifters. So I think overall they're a very, very solid A tier. They even get access to the healing spell, which makes them really good. The only thing that doesn't make them like an S tier, like the cleric for instance, is cleric gets extra spell slots to help them support everyone, and the divine spell list is very much designed around that, while the druids have to kind of pick certain orders and work in different ways. I think A is a very, very good place for the druid to sit. Exploration. Primal spellcaster. They get a lot of abilities that can help in a lot of different situations. It's really hard to find a situation where a druid is not handy, besides maybe like charisma situations or just the number of skills that they have access to. But beyond that, the primal spell list is really solid overall, and that will put them firmly in the A category as well for exploration. Roleplay. Woof. Druid's roleplay is good like most other classes. I think one of the things that keeps Druid held back is the orders can feel a little stifling at times, and there's not a lot of good media out there that makes Druids very exciting for players to pick. I think that the Druid kind of suffers from kind of getting put in the same shoebox as all Druids, and there's not a good way to, like, I speak for the trees, I'm the Lorax, you know. It's just kind of that all Druids kind of get put into that, even though they can be a lot more versatile than that. I think that they just have a lot of hard kind of stereotypes that they have to bypass, which I will mark them as a C for roleplay. It's just because, you know, it's like you're either the animal druid or the nature druid. And while you might be able to go up and beyond that and make it really interesting, I feel like the class itself doesn't really lend itself to that. So definitely, I think C tier, which puts them firmly in B. I'm not trying to make this overall like, oh, everyone's just kind of like in the middle, and we're gonna definitely be getting to some, looking at fighter here in a second, but it's just one of those things where a lot of the classes are balanced, and it's designed to be balanced, and the roleplay aspects for a lot of the classes are very mired in like old D&D style like ideologies. So Druid is a very, very solid class overall, and if you can get past the roleplay hurdle, Druid's definitely an A tier, and it's just under Cleric as far as you know, how versatile and usable it is as far in general in all three categories. So I think the Druid is a very solid pick. Fighter, everyone's seen it. If you're new to the community, and just know everyone loves Fighter. Fighter gets a +2 higher to their combat skills with a single type of weapon, but you know, who cares about that? Meaning that they hit 10% more often, they crit 10% more often, depending on the enemy, and they just do. I sat down, did the math, and honestly, fighters just do more damage than the other classes. Is it a lot more damage? No, but they do a lot of damage regardless. Not only that, but fighters have so many good feats for picking, you know, their combat styles. They get additional class feats more than other classes do, and they can change those every day. Fighters got a lot of choices as far as combat is concerned. Fighters definitely the premier S tier kind of combat class. You can't go wrong with Fighter. It's hard to multi-class archetype away from Fighter just because they have so many really, really good feats. So I think the Fighter's very, very interesting in that way, and overall they're a very solid pick in combat. Exploration. Fighter offers almost nothing in exploration. They can be strong, but they don't necessarily have the same strength benefits as the Barbarian does with like some of their rage stuff and everything. They do get some abilities that allow them to like recall knowledge, but that's only typically in combat. So Fighter just doesn't offer a whole lot. And whether you have like some intelligence for some skills or whatever, that's fine, but the class itself really doesn't lean to it. And this is actually gonna be my first D rank, which is really sad, but Fighter just does not offer all that much outside of combat and exploration, at least the class at base. It's tragic, but they traded ultimate power for you know, utility pretty much. And I still think Fighter is a very solid class overall. Don't let the D, you know, steer you away from Fighter. But if you want to do anything outside of combat, you know, free archetype's really good for helping pad that out, and that makes the Fighter all the stronger because, again, they're really, really good in combat. So anything that helps them outside in the other categories is really solid. Roleplay. I think Fighter actually has a very diverse roleplay pool. Whether you're a mercenary, an old knight, whether you're just someone who's just talented at using a weapon, I think the Fighter has no like specific roots, and they don't have any of the bad stereotypes like Bard does or the Thief Rogue kind of do that kind of shoehorn them into certain kind of personality types. So I think fighters can do a lot of things. They tend to be on the rougher and gruffer side on average, I feel, but overall I think fighters can fit a lot of different categories and well. And while their class doesn't lend to it, I think that they have a lot of ability. I'm going to mark their roleplay as a solid B. So S is 5, B is 3, and D is 1, putting them at 9 points. Overall, making them, just on the low end of B tier. I swear, this list gets more dynamic, but every class so far is pretty much in the B tier overall. And it's, again, the game is really well balanced. And the only reason why Alchemist kind of sits at C tier is because their combat style, I think, is just a little bit more niche, and it fits a very particular play style. Gunslinger, the fighter of guns. They're actually better than fighters with guns, which is reasonable, and crossbows as well. The Gunslinger has a lot of abilities, and depending on which way you pick for the Gunslinger, I think that they're very solid. Now, I do think that overall the Gunslinger suffers when they're not using certain weapons, and that can feel really limiting in combat. While you might enjoy the Gunslinger style, if you want to do anything else, even if you're doing like the Drifter, for instance, your melee strikes are hitting not as hard as your range strikes are. So I'm going to put their combat abilities at a solid A. Not only that, but constantly needing to reload can feel really taxing. But the Gunslinger can do a lot of damage, and certain builds can be very, very nasty. So I think the Gunslinger overall is a very, very solid choice for a class. They just don't quite match fighters' competency in most combat situations. Exploration. They kind of struggle in similar ways to the fighter in some respects. The Gunslinger does have some abilities that kind of help around this. If you're the Pistolero, for instance, you got a very more heavy intimidation style build. It can make coercing out of combat a little bit better. Other than that, though, they might have more crafting, you know, because they want to make bullets and everything like that. So the class kind of lends itself just a little bit more than fighter. So I'm going to put them at a solid C tier. Again, suffering from the fact that their class doesn't really offer much outside of combat, and they even have less as far as like athletics is concerned because they're mostly a dex-based class. So, you know, it is what it is. Just a few little added bonuses just put it above fighter in that category, so they're a solid C. And roleplay. I think the Gunslinger offers a lot of interesting aesthetics, but I think the class itself narrates you as kind of being the badass, you know, the good, the bad, and the ugly style, kind of cowboy style, or, you know, the sniper or whatever. I think they get shoehorned into a lot of different kind of rough styles. I mean, they even have like an ornery, I forget what the ability is called, but just no one can control them because they're just too stubborn. I think stubborn is actually what it's called. So I think they get shoehorned into a lot of different kinds of personality types. Though lore-wise for Galarian, I think that they're very, very interesting. But if we're not considering that the game is very based strictly on the lore, I think that they kind of suffer from some shoehorning, and just the class wants you to be a one style kind of character, and whether you can be a different one, I don't know. So I'm going to mark that as another C tier. So that's A is 4 and 2 C's for another 4. That's 8 points. That puts Gunslinger actually at the high end of C as well with Alchemist, which is kind of tragic. I like the Gunslinger in a lot of ways, and I think a lot of people really like Gunslinger, but I think it's just the way the class is designed doesn't really offer a lot aesthetically. They got a very, you know, black smoke and gunpowder kind of style, and I just wish that the books gave them a little bit more as far as like roleplay aesthetics are concerned. All right, we're halfway through the list. We're almost done. There's gonna be a longer video than I normally like to make, but I know people really want to know, at least most people's takes. Like, they want to see what other people think of some of the classes, and we're getting up to actually some of my favorite classes here soon, so I'm very excited for this. The Inventor. Combat Inventor's really good. They can augment their weapons, they can get a construct companion. They're considered more on the martial side despite having a higher intelligence focus. That intelligence focus does make them not quite as good as other martials, and they do need to, the player needs to have a really solid understanding of the game to get the most out of it. So its complexity kind of knocks it down a peg in my eyes. But if you know what to do with an Inventor, the Inventor is an incredibly solid class. I wish the, wait, it's not Misfire, it's Unstable. The Unstable condition kind of feels very limiting for a lot of their combat feats as well. I'm going to put the Inventor at a B tier, which is very unfortunate for their combat because I actually think they're really, really good. But it's difficult. Most people I don't think will understand or get the grasp of how good they are in combat. If you're a very knowledgeable player, it's an easy A tier. But I think in general, it gets knocked down to B tier. And that's only because it's just a complex class that needs to think outside of normally how it goes. And not only that, again, they have intelligence as their key trait, so they kind of struggle in a lot of ways as far as like having the same numbers as other martial kind classes as well. Exploration. The only thing that doesn't make them an S tier is the fact that it takes time for them to make things, and it's very unfortunate. They're like an A+. If it wasn't for the fact that they needed time to sit down and make everything, they'd be competitive with spellcasters for their utility and exploration. Not only that, but they have a high intelligence because it's their key trait, and they have a high crafting, which makes them very, very handy in a lot of situations. It's just a lot of it is it's very long-term usefulness and not a lot of immediate usefulness for their abilities. So I feel like they are a solid A tier as far as exploration is concerned, just because they have to actually make things, unlike magic casters that can just snap their fingers, say some words, and things come up and around. So that's unfortunate, but I think it's still really, really good, and it's an A tier. It is really solid. Roleplay. The Inventor, I think it's shoehorned into the Mad Scientist a lot, but what you can make gives them a good diversity, whether you're focused on your armor, whether you're focused on your weapons. I think a lot of them stem from similar kind of character type, but it can be diversified and personified in a lot of different ways. I think overall that they have a very solid A tier as far as their roleplay is concerned, especially with the kind of things they can make and everything like that. The way they look at things, the way they're either focused on, the arms race, or whether they're focused on innovation. I think they got a lot of options. That shoehorning doesn't affect them as bad as some of the other classes do, because a lot of the things they can do are always creative and interesting, and I feel are very satisfying. So I'm going to put that as an A tier, meaning the Inventor would see that's 4, 8, 11 points. That puts them right at the end of B tier as well. So again, a lot of classes are just really struggling to hit that A tier, and that's just because a lot of classes have strengths and weaknesses, whether it's the role player, whether it's their combat abilities. If I shifted the points even a little bit to be a little bit more lax, that would put Cleric, Inventor, and Cleric, Inventor in like the A range as far as classes are concerned. So they're definitely at like a B+ tier above some of the other classes, not making them better. I just think overall, following the 3 pillars, they're just a very solid class in more categories than some of the other ones. Investigator, my favorite class. I will try to be as unbiased as I can about it, but Investigator's really good. Combat ability wise though, unfortunately Investigator really struggles. They get sneak attack dice in a way from their strategic strike. They have the ability to launch a really good, because they can devise a stratagem and strike with a for sure hit or not. That makes the Investigator have a really good first round of combat as long as they're in stealth and they're using a ranged weapon, or the enemy doesn't move away or whatever, But I think they have a lot of stipulations in combat, and it makes them really rough. I think overall the Investigator's combat abilities are a solid B. They're not a C only because they can do like forensic. I forget what it's called. It's their style of investigation anyway. The forensic gives them like really, really good battle medicine stuff. They are really good at recalling knowledge on enemies. They can choose in some situations to deliver really powerful blows depending on their devised stratagem. I think they got a lot of options, but they have a lot of requirements as well, and I feel that's very limiting. So that's going to be a B for the Investigator. All right. Exploration. Investigator is a very solid S tier overall. They get so many skills. They match Rogue for the number of skills they get. They get a lot of skill feats. they can do a lot of different things, even if it's mobility based. They have a lot that they can do. They can even get into alchemy. They have a lot of options, and they can do a lot of things. Not only that, but they can get certain feats that allow them to help progress the story. That's not only helpful to the player, that can be helpful for the DM as well as progressing the narrative along. Not a lot of things can bypass the investigator's higher than average perception scores, and overall, the investigator just has a lot of fun and utility outside of combat. I say overall that they're an A tier, or no, they're an S tier in their exploration, just because that they can do so many things. They have so many options. They can fill so many different roles for the party that having an investigator just gives you a lot of options in combat. And they compete even with things like wizards who can just manifest certain things into the world. So I think they're a very solid S tier as far as exploration. The roleplay is a really rough category, I feel, to place them in accurately. There's not a lot of precedence. This is one of those classes that isn't like a transfer over from D&D necessarily, and a lot of people don't know what to do with them. I think a lot of people will lean heavily into like the Sherlock Holmes style character. A lot of characters will also be looking to them to be intelligent. And if you're not a player who plays smart characters very often, I think it's a lot more on the niche side of things. I do think the investigator has a lot of opportunities to do some very interesting things, to be expressed in a lot of different ways, but I think that comes from a position of being a much more experienced role player. So overall, I'm also going to put their general like role play ability in the B category, just because they don't, well, yeah, they're either hard investigator or like medical investigator, you know, like bones, for instance, which I think could be really interesting as well. They do get a lot of options. Actually, you know what? They get a lot of options on how they can approach it, whether you're going like hard CSI, whether you're going bones. I think with a lot of those TV shows can really help the investigator if you have that mindset. I do think it's a little bit of a push, but I think I'll put them in a solid A for the role play ability. Also, they have a lot of skills, and these skills can make their backstory. Their skills can make their backstory for them, and the skill feats and everything they have available. So I think definitely investigator has a very solid A. So with an S of 5 points, an A of 4 points, and a B of 3 points, that's 11. 9 plus 3, 12. Investigator's the first A tier, which I'm actually surprised, and take this as there might be some bias. The roleplay category might have been a little bit on the much side, or maybe that their combat could have been like a point off, but I think investigator does fill a lot of roles, and if you understand how the combat works, the investigator can provide a lot of things, and again, they can make a really good medical character to help the party along. They can do all kinds of things in combat, finding weaknesses. They can give bonuses to allies as well. I think it's a pretty solid one. I wouldn't recommend investigator for a lot of players, and they have some feats that can be a little troublesome at times, but I do think they're overall a really, really strong class, and I think we're going to see something very similar on the rogues side of things as well. The Magus is very interesting. It's a split class between martial and magic abilities. They have reduced magic slots with more martial abilities and more hit points per level. Overall combat, I think Magus is a solid A. Needing to recharge your spell strike makes it a little bit more of a difficult class, but because they're very motivated to attack in a very dynamic way, cast spells, do all kinds of stuff like that, I think that the Magus offers a lot of interesting abilities and choices. Not only that, but a lot of the hybrid studies for Magus are incredibly interesting and can make them very diverse in combat. So Magus is a very solid A from me as far as combat is concerned. Exploration. Magus is really good because they get spell casting and they have a book. Now, they are motivated to take more combat-related spells, but that doesn't stop them from taking more exploration-based abilities. Not only that, but because the Magus does need to invest a little bit into their intelligence to, make their spell DCs work out for them, I think that they are very solid in a lot of situations. I will probably put them in a very solid B tier. The magic is really good and gives them ability, but the reduced spell slots means that they're trading combat ability for exploration. So if you're full combat, it's rough. If you're more on like the exploration side of things, the two categories will swap around a bit. So I'm gonna put B for this one, but these two could be swapped at any point, but I don't think they could be an A in both. Roleplay. Magus has a lot of good roleplay ability. The hybrid studies, I think, are an interesting look onto how the Magus has delved into magic and combat as a theory. There's a reason why the Magus has split their focus. Spell Knights, I think, are really interesting. I think the Magus has a lot of really interesting potential, and they're not shoehorned into any kind of negative connotations. And a lot of players really like the Gish style kind of players, our characters and everything like that. I think they have a very solid A, actually, as far as their roleplay ability. The only thing preventing them from getting an S in roleplay, I feel, is that there's nothing handed to the player as far as roleplay beats are concerned. So they just don't have innately, I think, very interesting or very narratively exciting character aspects, but what the players can do with them can be a lot. So I think that's going to be a solid A as well. So 2 A's is 8 points and a B is 3, 11. That puts the Magus squarely at the high end of the B tier list here. I might change that a little bit to make the list a little bit more dynamic. Or maybe, can I make a B plus? Let's see here. Okay, I see. Let me do add a row above. All right, and this is gonna be B plus. And this one's going to be marked as a blue. Okay. I'm doing this mostly for the fact that there's a lot of classes that kind of bridge the I feel like having a huge B category is not very interesting, and I feel that these classes are just missing a little bit that pushes them into the A category. So we'll have a B plus category there, and hopefully that's satisfying. I don't know. All right, Monk. Monk's very good in a lot of situations for combat. Monk is another one of those classes that I feel very much struggle to multi-class archetype out of, because they have a lot of good combat feats. Their ability to swap stances and to deal lots of different types of damage is also really good. They're very, very versatile. They're also a high defense class. They match champion as far as defensive scores, but for unarmed and light armor. So I think the Monks are very, very solid. I think they have a lot of good resistances if you build that way, good abilities to hit things if you build that way. A lot of choices in combat overall. I think I'll put Monk as an S tier combat class. They have a lot of ways that can be built to do very, very strong things. The Monk hits really hard. They also have a really strong, because they start with Flurry of Blows, they also just hit a lot. And, if they go with Agile Strikes, they can just do a lot of damage. They get a lot of opportunities to strike enemies a lot. They can impose a lot of effects. So yeah, Monk's a very solid S tier combat class, and with their higher defensive abilities, some of their feats that allow them to resist things, have higher resist saves, all that kind of stuff, I think makes Monk overall a very, very solid class in combat. So we're going to put Monk in the S tier as far as combat is concerned. Exploration. Monk is a very dynamic class when it comes to mobility. There's not a lot of places a monk can't go if they take the right feats. Monks don't offer a whole lot for the purpose of finding solutions or you know, getting around certain things. They're not like necessarily geared towards being a face with a high dex and a high strength requirement as well. They have a hard time putting points into things like intelligence and charisma. I'm going to mark their exploration activities as a solid B tier, putting them above some of the other martial classes because their high mobility allows them to get to a lot of places, which is really good. Exploration, you know, the act of actually going somewhere, becomes a lot easier when you have a lot of mobility based things at your fingertips. And the only thing that stops them from being like an A tier is the fact that mobility is the only thing that they really got going for them. So we're going to make their exploration a solid B. Roleplay. Monk is kind of shoehorned into the whole like Buddhist monk kind of thing. I think if people take it more from a pugilist route, you know, someone who's just really good at martial fighting, they could do a lot more with it. They just struggle, I think, from the lack of any real identities that kind of put them outside of the Shaolin style or any of those kind of like archetypes. I think that there's a lot that can be done with them, but honestly, there's just roleplay wise, Monk just doesn't offer the players a lot to go off of. So I'm going to put their roleplay actually as a C, which is tragic. Monk is one of my top 5 favorite classes, and seeing them put into C in roleplay sucks. But that's because, again, I'm an experienced role player. I can get a lot more out of the class just by mentally putting it out there. But the class itself does not offer a lot for, you know, newer players or more general players. So that's going to be a solid C. So that's an S of 5, a B of 3, and a C of 2. That's 10 points. That puts Monk in the B category, just under the B+. But I think that's fair. Monk's a very solid class if you're starting new. Monk's a really fun class. You get a lot of options in combat. That mobility, as I mentioned before, makes exploration a lot of fun. There's a lot of things you can do with Monk, and I think Monk's are very fun. Monk's a very solid A tier as far as fun is in my consideration. Oracle. Oh, Oracle. This is going to be a fun one. I didn't even think about Oracle when I was initially conceiving this video. All right. Oracle. Okay. Combat-wise, Oracle. Oracle is a dance of death. You have to you get benefits at the cost of receiving disadvantages. As a spellcaster, I feel that they're pretty strong and they offer a lot of ability in combat, but I think for general players, they're really going to struggle with their curses. And not only that, but they're a divine spellcaster as well. And because they're not like Cleric, who get extra healing spell slots, they're going to have to just use the divine spell list, and divine spell list is much more on the support slash like alignment based casting spells. It's not as diverse as primal or arcane, and it I think even struggles as far as utility, as far as a call is concerned. The divine spell list is a good spell list. Don't let me saying this stop you from playing a divine spellcaster. Just know that the divine spell list is not a very hard combat spell list unless you're taking a very support list or you're fighting very particular types of enemies. They get some good spells, and you can have some really good pocket spells that you just use a lot, but that does kind of reduce your abilities. They get some really, really good focus spells. They can just see the weakness of an enemy, for instance. At higher levels, they can even just increase their curse to cast 5th level spells for free without using a spell slot. It's all really, really good. Some curses can even be turned to their advantage in combat if you know it. But I think overall, it's just a complex class. You're struggling against your own systems, and you kind of suffer in some certain categories. They also, I think, have lesser saves until later, which can be rough for the early levels as well. I'm going to put the Oracle's combat ability as a B. I don't think any class has a C in combat necessarily, besides the Alchemist, because it's a little bit more complicated. But the Oracle, I think, struggles from a lot of those same things. So B definitely for their combat abilities. Exploration. Oracle is kind of rough. They don't have a lot of ability to do as variable things as other spellcasters because it's divine, and divine doesn't have a lot of exploration based utility. They do have, you know, they have the ability to add a little bit more charisma or intelligence because they can be a hard spellcaster. There are some martial builds for the Oracle, but overall, exploration wise, I think the Oracle suffers. Now, they can get spells from other gods that can kind of help, but even those are not necessarily. Oracles are really good at like finding mysteries and stuff if they are geared towards it. I don't know. Oracle's got a lot of. If you understand the game, Oracle is not that bad. If you don't understand the Oracle, I think you're gonna struggle a bit. I'm gonna put the Oracle's exploration activities in the B tier because they have potentially. No, I'm gonna put C tier. They have a potentially like more skills, maybe if you're geared that way, or facing abilities if you're geared. That's rough. I'm gonna put it. I'm gonna put it as a C because it's really put onto the player on how useful they are and what they can do, and there's definitely ways you can gear your Oracle to be a little rough as far as exploration is concerned. Roleplay. Finally, Oracle's selling point. Oracles have so much potential as far as like how their curses affect them. They are kind of shoehorned into the whole like Oracle personality types, you know, characters who have seen something they shouldn't have seen, the sense of impending doom, that kind of stuff. I think they got a lot of interesting things, and I think their curses can be like familial based. They can there's a lot that can be done with the narrative. I think the shoehorning of their personality and kind of making them either odd or mysterious is unfortunately just kind of the box they're put in. It's not a bad box, but again, they are put into a box, unlike some of the other classes. I will mark it as an A. The curses offer a lot of fun potentials for roleplay, and there's a lot of very interesting things, whether it's looking into their curse, finding its origin. It's a lot of fun for the DM to, you know, set up a whole character arc about that. I do think they have a very solid ability. So overall, let's see, that's a C for combat. Right, I said C for combat. Yes, I'm pretty sure. If I'm wrong, oops. C for combat. No, it was B for combat. Yeah, okay. B for combat, C for exploration, A for roleplay ability. So that's 5, 3, and 2. That's 10 points. That puts. I'm sorry, that's not 5. That's 4, 3, and 2, which is 9 points. Still puts them well into the B category. Ranger. Ranger's combat ability is really, really good. There's a lot of builds for Rangers that can just do dumb amounts of attack, output dumb amounts of damage. I think the Ranger very much can contest with any class as far as damage numbers are concerned. And their only limiting factor is they need to hunt prey, which kind of pulls them back a little bit, but they can hunt prey before. I don't know. The need to hunt prey consumes an action, but that's fine because most people aren't able to hit on the third attack anyway, unless they're a flurry ranger. But even then, I don't know. I think that Ranger's a very solid S tier. Whether you're going animal companion, whether you're not going animal companion, Rangers can just lay the hurt on really, really well in combat, and they get a lot of feats that can help them do so. Exploration. they're pretty good. They got a lot of feats based on tracking, finding enemies, all that kind of stuff. The Ranger is very motivated to have a lot of good utility exploration type abilities. I think they're very, very solid. They can't solve every issue. They're not as mobile as like the Monk is. But I think overall the Ranger is an incredibly solid exploration character. They just might not have as many skills, and they might just be purely focused on those few areas. Regardless, those few areas are incredibly helpful. I'm going to put them in a very solid A tier as far as their exploration activities are concerned. They can do a lot. They can do a lot of things that are a big part of exploration. They can make sneaking easier. They can find the enemies. They can do all kinds of things that can make the actual act of exploration really, really good. They do suffer probably in the facing category. There's not a lot of reason for them to take charisma after all. And again, they're not like a wizard that can just manifest things. So, you know how it is. Roleplay. I think the Ranger suffers because like Aragorn wasn't a Ranger from, Lord of the Rings. And a lot of people like to play them as like the hermit, outside the city, prefer animals over people, that kind of stuff. I think they're very shoehorned into very particular kind of play style choices. As far as role play style choices, I do think that there's a lot more to that, but it's like you're either a bounty hunter, or a hermit, or you're Aragorn. And he was a bounty hunter. So yeah, they really got like two really solid ones. Again, you could probably do a lot of really interesting things with the Ranger, but the way the class is like presented in the media and the class doesn't get a lot of like actual role play based anything. It's probably going to mark them as a very solid B tier, because at least they do have very strong identities, unlike some of the other martials. Like Barbarian's very like everything's rage. But I think even Barbarian had like a B. So I definitely think roleplay wise, Ranger's a solid B. So that's an S in combat for 5, an A in exploration for 4, so that's 9, and a B in roleplay. That's 12. That puts Ranger up here with Investigator, which makes sense. They both are very similar in a lot of ways. Again, like to pursue a lead is the same thing as Hunt of Prey, only with more steps. So they're very similar in a lot of ways, and they can do a lot of fun stuff that way. Rogue, I feel is going to be a high scoring class. I don't think it's going to be an S, but I definitely think it's going to be an A. Combat wise, Rogues are really good. They get lots of really good to lay the hurt on. If they can flank with an enemy, or they have so many ways to make the enemy flat-footed to do that extra sneak attack damage. And they have a lot of feats that Rogues do a lot of damage, honestly. They're not as sturdy as some of the other classes are, but they make up for it by just playing smart, being in the right places, lots of good combat feats, lots of feats in general. Rogues can do a lot of things, and yeah, Rogues is definitely a very solid S tier combat class overall. They can just lay the hurt in so many ways, and they have a lot of abilities because they have a high skill amount, so they can do really good builds. You can even have an athletics-based thug bard, or the thug rogue, if you really wanted to trip the enemy constantly. Yeah, Rogue's very solid S tier, definitely. Exploration. Rogues are really, really good in exploration. They have so many skill points. They can do so many things. The ability to just have a class that's very motivated to pick locks, very good to have in your party. I think they're definitely an A tier, though. The reason why like Investigator gets an S, but Rogue gets an A, despite them being similar, is the Investigator can progress the story. They can follow the story beats, and that can actually make things move faster. They get feats designated for that. The Rogue gets all the same things except that. It just puts them just under as far as like the exploration abilities. But beyond that, Rogues get a lot. Rogues have a lot of access to all kinds of different feats and abilities that make them really good. They have a decent mobility, not as good as monks, but pretty good. They can't manifest things like a wizard can. So, you know, overall, I think that the rogue's a very, very solid in exploration. That's definitely going to be a solid A tier. Oh, the roleplay. Oh, the roleplay. The rogue, I think, is a very favored class as far as roleplay is concerned. A lot of people like the street urchin kind of style. I think rogue is very shoehorned into very particular player styles, whether it's the kleptomaniac, the street urchin. But I think rogue, or even like the assassin, they have a lot of stereotypes, but they also have a lot of stereotypes. So funny enough, that kind of gives them some more options as well. I think they definitely could be more on the A tier, like Investigator, if it wasn't for those hard, like, you know, stereotypes for the class in general. They get a lot of skills that could determine their background. They get a lot of things handed to them. I think, though, that your games might suffer because people have an expectation on how rogues should be played and will gear themselves towards that, unintentionally or not. It's going to unfortunately knock them down to a B. They have too many stereotypes, and not all those stereotypes are even that fun to play with. Kleptomaniacs are a pain, as another player or as a DM. So, unfortunately, I think that's going to put the rogue in the B category for that. Regardless, that's S for combat, A for exploration, and B for their roleplay, putting rogue very squarely in the A category. Whew! Oh my god, this video is over an hour long and recording right now, and I'm probably not even going to be able to cut all that many minutes out of it. So, sorry for the really, really long video. Pathfinder has a lot of classes. If you're still with me, you know, leave a like, subscribe if you're enjoying the content. If you disagree, put that down in the comments below. Again, it's very subjective. It's based on my opinions. Yours obviously will differ. I mean, people disagree on everything in tabletop anyway. But we're almost done. Sorcerer. The spellcaster that gets to pick their spell lists. It's really good. Very, very interesting. That gives them a lot of versatile options. They get more spell slots than other spellcasters. They're overall really, really solid. For combat concerns, being very reliant on their spells and, you know, spell DCs, their how the system is kind of geared, they're a little bit less than martials. I don't think any spellcaster is necessarily going to have an S in combat. They trade that for, you know, better abilities elsewhere. But I think the sorcerer, you can play them in any number of ways, supportive, offensive, whatever. They're an A. They're an A, and they're just so versatile. You can do in so many ways. They also get a lot of focus points, so they get even more spells on top of the fact that they have a lot of spell slots, just giving them a very high versatility. So yeah, that's a solid A. The exploration could be good, could be not good, depending on your spell list. It really depends. The sorcerer is very motivated to have a high charisma, which means that they can really strongly fit the face role. Anything a wizard do, a sorcerer could do as far as exploration is concerned. I'm gonna have to put the sorcerer as an S tier in exploration. They can just do so many things, and they can fill a face roll on top of it. You can go any number of places. They have a very good toolkit. It's really hard to bypass. And I actually will mark them down to A, only because it depends on the type of spell list you pick. If you pick Divine, your exploration activity abilities go way down. If you pick Occult, they're a little bit higher, but not much higher. So not all sorcerers will play the same. I'll have to make it an A, only purely for the fact that even though they can do all the same things as a wizard, they might not. And that might not drops them down like a half tier. It is what it is. It's still 2A is already, sorcerer is really, really solid. Roleplay. Sorcerer's got a lot of good roleplay. The origin of their powers, the fact that they, instead of needing to learn magic, need to learn to control magic, is great for generating character arcs. The Sorcerer has a lot of ability to generate very interesting narratives. Not only that, but they have so much calling to them in so many areas. Again, their bloodlines, they're the kind of magics they cast. I think the Sorcerer just has unlimited story potential. This is going to be our first S tier as far as roleplay ability is concerned, because the Sorcerer can just do a lot of character arcs for the DM, for the player. The Sorcerer just offers a lot, and it seems like I don't have any like very specific like things to talk about. It's because they have a lot of different bloodlines. They have a lot of different choices. They can just do a lot of things, and they're not beholden to them. They don't have any negative stereotypes that some of the other casters have, you know, other than maybe, oh, look at me, I can use spells without having to go to school for it. But, you know, like, whatever, you know, that's like the pineapple on pizza kind of conversation there. It's pointless. So that puts a solid C tier for roleplay, which is interesting. Actually, not what I was expecting. So 2 A's and an S puts at 13 points, which puts it at the squarely, and I think it's the highest rated so far. I think Sorcerer is the highest marked class overall that I put, which I was not expecting, actually, but definitely really interesting. Summoner. All right, Summoner is a very fun one. Combat-wise, Summoner, I think, struggles in combat. Not because their capabilities are less. The fact that their island and them can do actions together mean that inherently they get an extra action per round innately. I think one of the things that makes it rough is they are limited on their spell slots. And their island doesn't necessarily get a lot of combat related feats necessarily. They're not like a fighter who gets different types of strikes necessarily. They just get more capabilities in combat. So I think the Sorcerer kind of really struggles with a very definitive way that makes them easy to play. I think there's a really good way. I think that if you are knowledgeable in the system and can understand it, Summoner's A tier, but I'm gonna have to mark it B tier because I think generally for most players they're gonna suffer in a lot of ways, and they can even eat up their own action economy if they focus more on the actual summoning aspect of being a summoner, because it takes 3 actions to cast a summoning spell, which means your island gets 1 action, and then they have to sustain that action every round, reducing the number of actions they have, and that's split with their island. Yeah, it can be really rough. And also your character kind of plays second fiddle to your island sometimes, so that doesn't necessarily feel good. So I think a solid B tier for combat for the Summoner. Exploration. Actually, Summoner does pretty good. Their islands can be geared in very different ways to handle different types of environments, making them really handy. Their islands also, like the Angel Island, can get the ability to negate oppressive weather and like terrain effects, which opens them up for some very interesting exploration activities. Not only that, but the Summoner does get access to the arcane spell list, I believe. No, sorry, they get access to all the spell lists because it's based on their island. So they can do some things based on what spell lists they cast, what abilities their islands pick. But similar to the Sorcerer, because they aren't necessarily guaranteed to pick those kind of things, and because they have reduced spell slots, I'm gonna have to say that they're a B, just because not all summoners will have the same amount of utility in exploration. They can, and again, I think if you are knowledgeable in the system, it could be an A, but if you're a general player, I think it's going to be more on the B end of things. Roleplay. I think they got really good roleplay elements. Where their island comes from, the nature of their connection is really good and very interesting. That is the strongest beat that the Summoner has. And again, the Summoner can play second fiddle to their island in a lot of ways. it's kind of unfortunate, but I think I might have to mark him as a B in this as well. Purely for the fact that while they have some interesting story beats, it just doesn't feel good when your island outshines your actual character. And if you're into your island being a part of your character identity, that's good, but I don't feel like the two can be equally weighted necessarily. I think it's really kind of rough for a summoner to get really interesting roleplay out, and I think the story beats they have are what make them a B rather than like a C tier like some of the other classes. So I'm definitely that's just put summoners square in the B category. They're just right there. That's what, 9 points. Yeah, that's right in the B tier, low end of B. But yeah, overall a very solid general class. One that I would say I wouldn't necessarily recommend to newer players, but they have really fun aesthetics, and I think that the summoner is a lot of fun. Plus, I think there's a lot of really good, interesting build choices for the summoner as well. Almost done. Last 3. Whew, almost there. Swashbuckler. Swashbuckler is a pretty decent combat class. They have a lot of abilities that can help them kind of dynamically move through the combat field. They're very interesting, and I think they're very intriguing to play. They got some good combat abilities overall. I say that they're a very solid A tier. I think getting your panache can be a little rough at times against certain bosses, but technically, if your roleplay is good enough, you can get your panache no matter what, because all they have to do is just some kind of daring do. Not only that, but they can get feats as well that can just kind of bypass the skill requirements for panache anyway. And I think overall they're really solid. I don't think they're as good as, say, like a Barbarian or a Ranger in combat. But I do think that they are very much geared towards dealing with enemies in a way that not only deals damage, but makes them easier to take damage from your other party members. So I'm going to put the Swashbuckler as a solid A. Exploration. They have a higher chance of having charisma than maybe some of the martial classes. They don't really have a whole lot going for them, though. They don't have like the maneuverability of a monk, nor do they have any kind of magics. Again, they can be the party face, which is a good role to have, but they're not necessarily geared towards having more intelligence. They do have their stylish tricks, which does give them extra feats, but those feats are always orientated towards their swashbuckler style. So it's either like acrobatics, or it's probably, you know, diplomacy, intimidation, or something along those lines. So I think I'm gonna have to put them in the C category. They just don't bring a whole lot to exploration activities, not as much as some of the other classes do. Like, at least the summoner has magic sometimes. So unfortunately that's going to be a C for the swashbuckler as far as the exploration. Sorry, my voice, I haven't done a long video like this ever, so my voice is starting to fail me, but we're gonna push through. Roleplay. I think the swashbucklers got really strong roleplay aspects. They're motivated mechanically to make fighting scenes more interesting, which makes the combats more interesting, which is good for the game's health overall. Not only that, but whether they're like a swashbuckling pirates, or whether there's some, you know, dandy, daredevil kind of character, I think they got a lot of potential for interesting narratives. And, you know, the stereotype that kind of comes with them, Three Musketeers, you know, all that kind of stuff, very interesting for the swashbuckler. I think if anything, they just don't have a very, very strong, like, narrative pull in any direction, but they got a lot of flexibility. And again, they make combat more interesting inherently because they're motivated to do so. So I'm going to mark that as an A. So 2 A's, which is 8 points, and then a B, which is 3 points, is 11. Oh no, I'm sorry, not B. C. So that's 10 points. That puts Swashbuckler very much in the B category. They haven't made a B plus category, and they have I put a B plus category, and the B tier is still twice as long as any of the other tiers. Again, the game's balanced. What can I say? They did a good job balancing them. Witch is a really, really good class. Overall combat ability, the Witch is as good as most spellcasters. They can pick their spell list. They get interesting hexes that can debilitate the enemies. They have a familiar, which some of the familiar's master abilities can be really good for generating focus points, getting extra cantrips, all that other kind of stuff. I say the Witch is just a good spellcaster overall, putting them squarely in the A territory. Again, I'm thinking the spellcasters are necessarily S tier, being very reliant on DCs and the like. I feel like the spellcasters in general trade potential for S tier combat for, bonuses in other areas. So I'm going to put the Witch squarely in the A category as well for combat. Exploration. The Witch is similar to the Sorcerer. They can do pretty much anything that a Wizard can do, but they don't always do. They do have a familiar, which does give them some additional options for certain things in combat. I think that would put them just above Sorcerer as far as their exploration activities. And the Witch is an intelligence-based class, so they have more skills standardly. They can even go into facing if they really want to. The extra skills, though, I think really, really does help. So I think the Witch is also just going to be a very, very solid A tier as far as their exploration abilities are concerned. And last but not least, the roleplay. The Witch has amazing roleplay. Whether it's role-playing with the familiar, the GM can do all kinds of things to make the familiar very, very interesting. The nature of the patron of the Witch, the fact that the Witch can pick all the different spell lists and the different lessons from their feats. Like, there's a lot of story potential with the Witch as far as narrative is concerned. And I think it's just, there's so much, it's really hard to ignore otherwise. I think the Witch is a very, very solid S tier as far as the roleplay is concerned, which makes it our second S tier as far as roleplaying is concerned. Again, I'm surprised, but now I'm not surprised because I understand it's the same thing as Sorcerer. They have a lot of options, and I think they're even a little bit higher than Sorcerer, like an S plus, because the patron thing, the familiar thing, they just get all the same things as Sorcerer and more. And I think the Witch just has a lot of really good interesting things. Now again, there's not any like specific feats for it. There's not any specific examples I can give. They just have unlimited roleplay potential, and they're motivated, the GM, to make narrative around it. So I think the Witch is very, very solid. That will put the Witch straight into the A plus category, or the A category, I guess. Same rank as the Sorcerer, which is good. Oh, last but not least, and then we're done with this video, hour and a half in. Oh man. Is the Wizard. Combat ability. Wizard is got all the standard combat spells. The arcane spell list is the most expansive spell list in the game. They're not lacking in what they can do in combat. I think if anything prevents them from, like necessarily being an A is if you play a very utility-based wizard, but the class as a whole doesn't necessarily force you to do that, and there's no playstyle that's necessarily geared towards that either. And even if you are, your utility spells are probably helping your party. Wizard gets a very solid A tier as far as their spellcasting ability is concerned, and for combat overall. Exploration. I said it a million times, wizards can do pretty much anything as far as, because the arcane spell list is very diverse. There's so many different spells that the wizard can use in any situation. They can have a spell for every occasion. They have a high intelligence because they're a wizard, so they have more skills than other classes tend to. Because they're a squishy wizard, they might have even decent charisma, because why even put points in any other combat stuff? Really, because that, like, as a frontliner wizard can suffer. You can do it. There are builds for it. Don't get me wrong. I'm saying as a class in general, what they're providing for you, you have a lot of options. So wizard gets a very solid S tier for exploration. Roleplay. The wizard is an interesting one. It has stereotypes like the old man spellcaster, you know, the academy students, or even like an apostate kind of style wizard. I think they're similar to the rogue in the fact that they got a lot of like a lot of stereotypes, but they have a lot of stereotypes. I think they get very shoehorned into always going after magic and being very centered around magic. And I think that limits them just ever so slightly more than even like the rogue is concerned, because that's just the thing. Wizards are the magic based ones, are focused on magic. And so while that's a strong one and very helpful to players, it's also very limiting for players who might want to do something outside of it. It's hard to make a wizard who's just not about magic. And I feel that's a very limiting factor in some ways. Again, there's a lot of different approaches to it, but I think it's always geared towards that. So wizard actually is going to get a B tier as far as their roleplay is concerned. That still means that the wizard gets an A, because that's S tier is 5, A is 4, that's 9, B tier is 3, that's 12 points. Yep, very, very solid A tier. Just under something like the rogue or the sorcerer or the ranger. But the wizard has a lot of interesting ways they can be played. They're very high utility. They could be really good in combat if you need them to be. Overall, wizard, very, very solid. And that's the tier list. Now, like I said, this is very subjective. This is very baseline. I tried to be as straight and like objective as I could be. I did say that I did have some biases, and you know, that might change the positioning of like Investigator, but overall I think this list is very, very solid. And this list is variable. Like I said, your table might have different weights for different situations. If your table is more combat based, Gunslinger can jump from C to an A instantly. If your table is, or if your table is a lot more focused on exploration, that could push things like Fighter and Barbarian down into C or even D tiers, just because they don't offer a lot in those kind of categories. Overall, and also how you play, this is not even mentioning multi-class archetypes. This is not even mentioning free archetypes. This is not even mentioning what certain magic items can add to your characters. So your character might start at any point on this table and move up and down the list based on how you play the character. And in fact, in our video I'm going to be doing soon is how to make your character and how you play the game even better to get the most out of your experience. But with that, this is what we got. Do you agree? Do you disagree? I'd like to know down in the comments. If you liked the video, please subscribe to see more amazing videos like this. We're going to be trying to pump out a few more videos in the week. We're going to get back on track with things. 2022 has been a really rough year so far, but we're going to try to make the best of it. And if you want to join the Discord to talk all things table talk, including things like Warhammer, or I even recruit there for my games first before anywhere else. So you want the chance to play with me and my friends, join us in the Discord down in the link below. But with that, I'm going to go rest my voice, and that's going to be it for me. Good luck with your games. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and leave the bad luck to me. Bye.